Hi, everyone. Welcome and good evening, and thank you for joining us for tonight's program of Virtual Neurodiversity Panel. My name is Siobhán Alvarez, and I am the Executive Director of the Atlanta Autism Consortium. If this is your first time joining one of our programs, welcome. We are a nonprofit organization dedicated to creating collaborative connections throughout the Metro Atlanta autism community and throughout the country. We host free programs and events every month and aim to serve the spectrum at large, including parents and family members, adults with autism, researchers, clinicians, and educators. Before we get started, a few housekeeping notes. Please know that your microphone will remain muted, but you can feel free to ask any questions throughout the event by typing them into the chat box, which is located at the bottom of your screen. So feel free to ask your questions throughout the panel. And just to make sure that everyone sees it, I will be sending a message when I finish giving this welcome in the chat box. If you would like everyone in the event to see your message, make sure you've selected everyone. If you just want our panelists to see it, make sure you've just selected panelists. After tonight's program, you will also receive an email with access to our panelist information. This evening, we are joined by Amanda Alonzo, Olivia Hopps, William Brust, and Dr. Kerry Magro, who will also be serving as our moderator. Dr. Magro is an award-winning national speaker and best-selling author who has become a role model in the disabled community. Nonverbal at 2.5 and diagnosed with autism at 4, Kerry has overcome countless obstacles to get to where he is today. In May of 2019, Kerry received his doctorate in educational technology leadership from New Jersey City University to become Dr. Kerry Magro. He is currently CEO and founder of KFM Making a Difference, a nonprofit corporation focused on disability advocacy and housing. Today, Kerry travels the country sharing his story and telling our society to define their lives and their dreams in the best way they can. Dr. Magro, would you like to take things from here?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, again, thank you so much to the Atlanta Autism Consortium for having us for what I hope will be a very enlightening 60-minute presentation. I am so glad to say that I have been able to overcome many of my obstacles. As a child, I was not speaking. I was diagnosed with autism when I was 4, didn't speak in complete sentences till I was 7. And now I speak with all of you tonight as a professional speaker. Received my certification from the National Speakers Association 11 years ago. And I've been traveling the globe, getting the opportunity to talk about autism inclusion and how we can go best about supporting individuals with disabilities across the lifespan. It's also given me the opportunity to write 4 books based on my journey. As a thank you to the Atlanta Autism Consortium for having us all out tonight. I will be donating signed copies of each one of my books in the hopes that they are a potential resource for your nonprofit organization. You guys do some tremendous, tremendous work within our community. I grew up diagnosed with PDD-NOS when I was 4 with extreme key interests. Those 2 extreme key interests were becoming the 6th member of the Backstreet Boys and the next Larry Bird. So I fell in love with basketball. I got a degree in business and sport management before deciding to change career paths and going into a career in communications and education in the hopes of not only continuing this topic around inclusion, but also taking my love of theater to become an autism entertainment consultant, getting to work with our entertainment industry to bring a realistic portrayal of autism to our entertainment industry, getting to work on films such as Joyful Noise and the upcoming season of Netflix Love on the Spectrum. I will be your moderator for this conversation that we'll all be having tonight. And just for a few housekeeping things. So the objective of tonight's panel is to educate educators, therapists, and caregivers on neurodiversity from a first-person perspective, breaking down current biases around autism. I mean, we have so many biases in our autism community today that hopefully we will be able to debunk at this panel tonight. So one of the big things that you should know is that autism is the fastest growing developmental disability. For those who are new to our community, I applaud you for sharing in the chat box a little bit about yourselves as part of our interactive activity. If you want to continue that conversation throughout the evening, feel free to go in the chat box, tell us where you're from and also when you were first introduced to the topic of autism. So autism is the fastest growing developmental disability, impacting 1 in 44 today, 2% of the US population. In addition to that, over 7 million individuals worldwide have some form of autism diagnosis. So we need to do our due diligence while also providing reliable autism resources across the lifespan. And finally, autism does not end at the age of 18. The popular image of autism is on children, but autistic children will become autistic adults, and we need to be ready for them. 1.1 million autistic teens will transition to adulthood within the next decade. And the unfortunate fact is that the majority of autistic adults are unemployed or underemployed in the United States. Only about 1/3 of autistic students in the United States pursue a post-secondary education. A little bit over 80% of autistic adults are still living with their aging parents. In addition to that, guardianship, the majority of autistic adults, parents do not have a will in place for their child. So these are really, really important conversation starters we need to have. But enough from me for the time being. I would love to open it up to the intro question that we have for all of our esteemed panelists tonight. And we were going to start off with Olivia. And my question for you, Olivia, is to, first off, tell us a little bit about yourself. And then also, why are you passionate about this topic of neurodiversity?
Hi, Kerry. Thanks for having me. And thank you for everyone for tuning in. Like Kerry mentioned, my name is Olivia. I'm 26 years old, and I was diagnosed with autism a couple years ago when I was 24. I am so passionate about neurodiversity and this topic because for me, as I mentioned, I didn't get diagnosed till I was much older in life. And I feel that it's super important for me and everybody in the community to try to help get females specifically diagnosed earlier in life so they don't have to have all the struggles and hardships and traumas that I know so many other females on the spectrum have gone through growing up unknowingly autistic. A little bit more about myself. I'm from San Diego, California, and I am a small business owner. Before I started my own business 7 years ago, I worked in the sports journalism field. I worked for many different publications, including Sports Illustrated and the NFL Network. And I also worked for the San Diego Union Tribune, which was amazing. It ended up not being all I wanted it to be, even though it was a special interest of mine. And as Kerry mentioned, for autistic adults, it's really hard to hold down employment. And so I realized I wanted to be my own boss. And so I started an online edible cookie dough business at the age of 19. And it's been very successful 7 years since then. And when I was diagnosed with autism a couple years ago, I decided to start a YouTube channel trying to bring awareness to females on the spectrum so that more and more females can figure themselves out if they've been wondering their whole life why they seem to be a little different than everyone. Because when I was finally diagnosed, it was the best day by far of my entire life. And so, as I mentioned previously, now it's my goal to try to bring more awareness to women and young girls on the spectrum. And now I actually have also launched an online edible cookie dough business course so other autistic adults can start their own successful online business as well. Kerry, I'll turn it back to you.
Awesome, awesome. Thank you so much, Olivia. And now, gentleman, I have the honor to say is actually involved with the Atlanta Autism Consortium. His name is William. William, could you tell us a little bit about yourself in addition to why you're passionate around this topic of neurodiversity?
Sure thing, Kerry. Well, like it says on the screen, I guess I was diagnosed very early on with pervasive developmental disorder. That was the first diagnosis we had. I was diagnosed with a couple different things over the years. I didn't get my autism diagnosis until I was in college. I was about 19, I think. It was the summer of my freshman year of college. I had just gotten fired from a position as a summer camp counselor. And part of the reason was I wasn't picking up on social cues because I never picked up on social cues. I just thought I was weird. I didn't know what was going on. I always knew I was different. I didn't know why. So getting diagnosed, when I finally read what was then the symptoms for, or yeah, I guess symptoms or signs rather, for what was then called Asperger's syndrome, I was like, is this a joke? Is this a real thing? Like, this is ridiculous. This is me. So yeah, I mean, I was really excited to finally get diagnosed, and then just learning more about it. And I'm slowly coming to grips with neurodiversity as a thing. You know, I was always kind of taught to try to blend in as much as possible and try to make myself more or less neurotypical. And I've had some success with that. I can blend in, I can mask pretty well. But this idea of seeing autism as a strength and not just a weakness, and trying to make it a part of my identity, that has been something I've had to grapple with, because it's such a strange concept, because my mind is still very much thinking of it as a disease when it's really not. It's a way that the brain is wired. But anyway, yeah, I went to college. I graduated from Presbyterian College in 2006, got my master's in teaching at Georgia State back in 2015. And now I'm working as a grant writer and part-time tutor. So I'm excited about the future and all that. I didn't have an ending.
Oh, William, go ahead. Sorry.
No, I didn't have an ending. I just trailed off there at the end. I got nervous.
No, don't be. So William, it's the first time I'm actually getting to meet William virtually, e-meet, as we have learned in the COVID-19 world. I am so excited with all the people in the chat box as well. We have people tuning in tonight from Puerto Rico, Canada. We have people from California. So we're getting a nice mix of people who are here with us this evening. So that's really, really exciting. For everyone who missed us at the beginning in the chat box, feel free to tell us where you're tuning in from tonight, in addition to when you were first introduced to the topic of autism. And finally, last but not least, Amanda, if you would like to tell us a little bit about yourself and why you are passionate around the topic of neurodiversity.
Hi, thanks, Kerry. So hi, everybody. My name is Amanda Alonzo. As you see, I'm a 37-year-old Latina, Mexican, Puerto Rican, and I was diagnosed in my late 20s. I also have a son who has autism, and he was diagnosed when he was 2. I'm here in Southern California. I own my own private practice, kind of like Olivia. I decided that being my own boss was going to be the best thing for me. Luckily, I have realized that my special interest is in the human brain. So I have a job that really caters to my special interest. I graduated from my master's at Cal State Dominguez Hills, and I'm currently working on my doctorate in marriage and family therapy. And I'm doing my research on women on the spectrum in relational settings. And I will, from now until as my hope for decades to come, do research. It is always great to be a part of the community that we are researching. And I do know that there are very few researchers who have autism, and are women. So it's always that intersection is always helpful, and to be able to add that lens and contribute to the growing research of not only the autism community, but adults on the spectrum too, and specifically women. I own my own private group practice, and that's where I'm currently at. All right, Kerry, back to you.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Amanda. And again, I love just what Olivia and Amanda are saying, because again, for people who are just joining us, we're now at just over 100 attendees, which is amazing for a webinar. We have a real situation going on in the United States where autism is still seen as a boy disorder. As we mentioned at the beginning, boys are diagnosed 4 times more often than girls. So we need to make sure, again, one of my favorite people in our autism community, Dr. Stephen Shore, says, if you met one individual with autism, you met just that one individual with autism. We need to make sure girls don't fall through the cracks. So we have 5 panel questions for our esteemed panelists tonight before we open it up to Q&A at the end for any questions that any of you have. And the first question is, if you could give one piece of advice to an educator or therapist that would have helped you growing up autistic, what would that be? William, would you like to start us off on this question?
See, this is a harder one for me because I didn't know I was autistic when I was growing up. But I think the biggest thing I could say is to just be patient, and realize that, even if we're nonverbal or if we have bad days, we have good days, with meltdowns and whatnot, just having that extra bit of patience. And don't give up when you're not sure. If you think something's an issue with a child and they're not getting the diagnosis or the help they need, really it's important to get in there and say, hey, I think this kid might have something, because I've been doing that lately, because I see kids every so often come to me in the tutoring center and I'm like, oh, he's one of us. I can spot members of the tribe right away. So I think that's important, is to help people see those early signs.
Early intervention is the key. Couldn't say it better myself, William. Nicely done. Amanda, how about you?
So as a therapist, that's what I do in my everyday life. I think one of the things that I hold on to is realizing and remembering that there is not a look per se to autism, really taking a curious stance for anybody that comes into the room who may suspect that they are different. And then for educators is just remembering that at times, maybe in the household, there might not be a lot of education around autism, like a lot of information. And so the children themselves, just giving that psychoeducation piece, that's for both therapists and educators. A story that I've shared before is, so for my son, he's in a very neurodiverse affirming school. It's with typical students, and it's a program that's amazing here. They started out here and it's been going on for 20 years and it's been very successful for those on the spectrum. And one of the things that, even though it's been on for 20 years, it wasn't until last semester that one of the teachers didn't realize, until my son, because he grew up in a household where we talk about autism a lot. It's normalized for us because it's a part of us. So one of the things he did in school was, when they asked him, oh, James, why do you do that? And he's like, oh, because I have autism. And then it took all the kids, like one of the kids piped up and goes, oh, I have autism too. And then another one was like, I have autism too. They all didn't realize, the teacher didn't realize that they all didn't realize that they all were in that class because they all have autism. They all have that shared experience. And it was so helpful. And they were just like, yeah, me too. Oh, you do too. And so it got them kind of interacting with each other, which is at times hard for them to do, because it was normalized. It becomes more of just, yeah, this is what I have and that's it. But I think that's really helpful. So, okay, thank you.
Awesome. And Olivia, how about yourself?
Yeah, much like William mentioned, I didn't know growing up that I was autistic, and boy, would my life have been much easier had I known. And I went to a lot of therapists growing up, starting in junior high and high school. And the one piece of advice that I'd want to give is to become better educated about how autism presents itself in females, because when I even as an adult brought up that I thought I might be autistic to my current therapist, she shot it down immediately and said there was no way, because I could hold a conversation with her. And so that would be my main piece of advice for therapists, is to just, keep up with, all the research that's being done and more autistic women being diagnosed, and how it presents itself and how we present the traits so that we don't fly under the radar. I'd want to give that piece of advice also to educators in school, because I once again flew under the radar because I was a very good student and seemed very intelligent, and I got straight A's. And even though I do, have intelligence and got straight A's, I actually was dealing with learning disabilities, and nobody ever knew because I, again, flew under the radar, was very shy and reserved, which is a very typical trait or symptom to a young girl who may be on the spectrum. We oftentimes have very high IQs, but we can struggle with learning disabilities, but nobody ever realizes because we're so good at masking and blending in. So I guess, yes, similarly, like Amanda and William said, like, be curious. If you see something that you think, oh, they're just shy or whatnot, like, I encourage you to try to reach out and get to know them a little more and just see if possibly there's something deeper that's not showing. So yes, Kerry, back to you.
Oh my goodness, Olivia, thank you for mentioning masking. So I have a frequently asked question list, and the top 10 are slowly transitioning because masking is the question I constantly get from parents, and it can lead to burnout in so many of our loved ones, where they're trying so badly to hide different characteristics of what makes them who they are. So we need to have larger conversations about that. So really, really glad, Olivia, you brought that up for the conversation. So our next question is, and thank you all so much for posting questions in the chat already. We will be getting to as many questions as we can at the end of tonight's presentation, so keep them coming. The next question we have for our panelists are, how are you doing and what has changed for you since the pandemic began? Obviously, during COVID-19 2 years ago, our lives changed drastically from lockdown towards other challenges as well. So we just wanted to know how all you guys are doing. So let's start off with Amanda, if you wouldn't mind joining us for this question to kick us off.
Thanks, Kerry. I'm doing well, as well as can be in a doctorate program at the end of that. So as well as can be. But what has changed for me is my whole practice has changed. It's now online. So I'm always in front of the screen, which has been really helpful in certain ways. I wear a lot more clothing that's more comfortable to me. So I get to have my shoes off while I'm giving my sessions. I have a full practice, so I'm here for hours at a time, and I get to have my shoes off. I get to be in a much more comfortable environment that is really honed to me with, and I always take consideration for my clients when they would come in person. But now I get to really hone it just to my needs, and then my clients can make their own environment to their needs. But that has been really extremely helpful from a sensory perspective. When you get to spend hours at a time in like really comfortable clothing, I think that's always a great thing. The other part is just, while it's unfortunate, all that the stresses this pandemic has put upon, it's really allowed my practice to grow, being in the mental health field, knowing that there's a need, and me and my colleagues being able to fulfill that need, and really showing up when it's needed. Yeah, thank you.
Well said, well said. William, how about yourself?
Honestly, the early pandemic was pretty good for me. I lost a ton of weight because I couldn't walk to the store like I was doing all the time, going out to eat all the time. But no, I lost a ton of weight. I've been working more with doing the kind of work I want to do. I ended up losing a job at Georgia State, and then I just got hired for another job at Georgia State. So that's exciting. But yeah, I've just been getting, the biggest change really has been my social life. It's kind of changed. It hasn't gotten worse, I wouldn't say. It's just changed shape because a lot of friends have moved, and a lot of the old groups that I used to be involved with, church groups and whatnot, have kind of changed dynamics. So now I'm doing more with the community that I'm involved with. Now I moved out of my parents' house. I'm in an apartment with two other gentlemen who also have autism. And there's a lot of fellow autistics in our, I want to say facility, our apartment complex. And so I'm getting to know them and getting to interact with them a lot more. But I kind of miss my neurotypical friends and having those connections, because I can't always connect with my fellow autistics the same way. I don't know. It's hard. It's hard for me to connect with people in general, I guess. I don't know. I don't know if that answers the question.
Yeah, William, I'm not gonna lie. I can, you're preaching to the choir for me specifically, because, for example, it's like I've only ever dated neurotypical women. And it's like, and don't get me wrong, I would always be open to the opportunity, but to date an autistic girl. But it's always been, I've always had that connection. It feels like we're kind of preaching to the choir in both our rights. But anyways, I digress. There's some great questions that are coming in on dating, so we'll definitely talk a little bit about that later on as well. So Olivia, what are your thoughts on this question, and how are you doing?
Yeah, I'm good myself, and I think much like William and Amanda, the pandemic, thankfully, and I've been very blessed to not have been affected negatively by it. I actually quite enjoyed the lockdowns because I didn't have to go out as much, which is not my favorite thing to do. And it allowed me to move out of a city that I didn't like living in, and back to my hometown of San Diego. It also helped my business because it kind of exploded when everybody was first in their lockdowns, because it's an online business, and people, I think, were bored at home and would find my online business Unbaked, and but business really boomed for me. It has allowed me to really kind of stay fresh and not in so much burnout, because, as I mentioned, I didn't have to go out and didn't have to see people as much. And so that really helped my mental state. And it also has allowed me to start some new businesses and do some things that maybe I wouldn't have normally have done. So yes, very thankfully, I've been very blessed to have had, nothing negative happen since the pandemic. It's really only been positive things. So I've been very lucky there.
Awesome. So the next question is, obviously we talked a little bit about this at the beginning, but there is such a lack of resources out there for autistic adults. Most publicly funded services end at the age of 18. What's one area you would like to see more supports for in the community, and why? Will, would you like to start us off on this one?
I was in the chat looking at stuff. Let me read this. Okay. More supports for in the community. It's hard to say, because there are supports that, what we really need, honestly, is just some kind of centralized database that has all the different resources that there are, so people can do a search and find what they need. Because there's a lot of information out there, and there are a lot of great organizations like Atlanta Autism Consortium. Great example. I heard of Atlanta Autism Consortium 2 years ago. I heard of Marcus Autism Center maybe 10 years ago. These are organizations that have been around for a while, but you never see them on, there's never any commercials on TV. I never see an ad in the paper. My therapist growing up couldn't tell I was autistic. I don't know why, because it was pretty obvious. Just getting that information out there. We used to have something called a benefits navigator that was really helpful. And having those kind of supports are so key, because when parents have to do things by themselves, and let alone folks like me who are on the spectrum, trying to navigate the labyrinth that is Social Security disability, it can be almost impossible, especially when you're, I mean, I don't want to, I can go on a rant about Social Security. Really just having support or navigating those resources would be great.
Yeah, well, you and me could get a glass of wine right now and literally talk about that for hours, because I kid you not, that's the topic we don't talk enough about: special need financial planning, SSI, SSDI. So Olivia, what are your thoughts on a specific area that you think could use more supports in the community for autistic adults?
Yeah. Well, first, I just want to say, William, I really like your idea about the, having some place people can go to look up all the resources, because sometimes it can be really hard to find the right resources. But anyways, I think for me, we need more support in the workplace, and not even just the workplace. I mean, yes, very much the workplace, but also just allowing autistic people to know that they can be successful on their own as, a small business owner or whatnot, just like Amanda and I are, because it can really alleviate some of the stresses that going to work can cause for an autistic person. There's not as much stimuli, and we don't have to have social interactions. We don't have to get in a car and drive there. So yeah, I feel like supports like giving funds to an autistic adult that wants to start their own business, grants or loans or whatnot, and resources like maybe there's courses like I've made, or mentorship following somebody that has started their own business, and for people to learn like how to use online platforms like Shopify or whatever it may be if they want to sell a product. So I think that would be an area, since so many adults are underemployed or non-employed, definitely is something that I think would be super beneficial.
Yep. I see a lot of autistic adults actually go towards entrepreneurship as a line of work, because they get to work their own schedules, and I've seen it work tremendously. My nonprofit has been lucky to give out 15 grants, small business grants, for small businesses that hire people with disabilities. And Olivia, while you were talking, there's this 9-year-old girl who started an eco-friendly business for herself, who's on the autism spectrum, and we gave her a grant. And to just see the future generations of individuals who have just been inspired by going into small business work, it's just it's really remarkable.
Wow, that's really cool. Thanks for telling me that story.
So Amanda, what were your thoughts?
So like William and Olivia, when they both pointed out having a database, I imagine each state differs, but a database, because one of the things that I've always noticed is there are supports out there. It's about connecting it to the actual community that needs the support. And it's always that connection in multiple different areas, multiple different fields, that connection that always becomes the problem. Is how do we connect to the actual community that needs this support? Because we're here, how do we connect that? And then the other part that's really dear to me is built-in socializing, social support. If for some reason, and that's what makes my son's program so successful, and that's what helped me when I was younger, is there's this type of, come from a really big family. I mean, I'm Latina, it's a big family. So it's built-in social support. So I always had friends per se, because it's family and we're all there. And for my son, his school provides that. And so it goes, and then it just drops off, or so it seems. There is a lot of groups and programs, like Meetup is a really great app to use to find like group support for neurodivergent people, but for it to actually get funding, so that these social supports can actually do things out in the community. And we're talking about for adults that choose to go in it, and then also can intersect neurodiverse and neurotypical people, like actually, again, just everybody wants friends. Some people want lots of friends, other people just want a couple of friends. It's just a matter of having the options and opportunity. It's pretty nerve-wracking. I mean, I'm 37 and it's still nerve-wracking and I'm a therapist, and it's still nerve-wracking. But yeah, so being able to have that type of built-in kind of scaffolding it, I think would be so helpful and so needed for adults on the spectrum for us to navigate the social aspect. Thank you.
Yeah, Amanda, I just think about how many businesses, especially that could utilize that as part of career fairs and being able to kind of organize that would probably bring in a lot of interest and really tap into that untapped pool of autistic adults. So just in the spirit of time, because we have some amazing, you guys did not disappoint. We have some amazing questions that came into the chat box. We're going to include this question in the final Q&A. So finally, one of the final questions I would like to ask before we open it up to Q&A is, anything else you'd like us to know about you and your work? And maybe we'll start off with Olivia this round.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, so I say this often, but I always like to say it because it's something I'm really passionate about, and it's that you can be successful to anything you put your mind to. I really truly believe that. I'm somebody that's put my mind to some really big aspirations and I've achieved them. And just because you're autistic, it doesn't mean you can't, do whatever you dream of becoming. It may take you a little longer, maybe a little harder. You may have to do it in a non-traditional way. Like I didn't go to college, but I got a job at the NFL Network at only 18 years old, right out of high school. I was able to do internships and other programs where I learned what I needed to learn to get my job instead of going to 4 years of college, which I would have never been able to handle as an autistic adult, or I didn't know I was autistic, but so I always like to say that, and then just own your autism, and it's nothing to be ashamed of. So Kerry, thank you.
Sure. Amanda, how about yourself?
One thing that I hold dear to me and have for about 2 decades, about 15 years now, is a little piece of advice that I received when my son got diagnosed, and I use it for myself too, is do not lower your bar. Don't lower the standards, not for your children, not for yourself. It may take you a different path to get to wherever you have to go, kind of like Olivia said, we are capable of doing some great things, some amazing things. And one of the first things we want to do as parents, because I am a parent to someone with autism, is kind of like, it's okay, let me do it all for you. But when I was told that is you keep that bar high, you have expectations of your child. And then I applied that to myself, have expectations of yourself too, that we are capable of doing things. We just take a different path sometimes to get there. The path may be very different at times, but that we are capable. Thank you.
Yeah. Amanda just dropped the mic there because as much as Amanda was just talking about this, I just kept thinking about Temple Grandin and her quote where she talks about stretching our kids. And I always say presume competence. When you meet people for the first time, just meet them where they are in their development, and you'll see them nurture their own strengths when you find them at an early age, work on the weaknesses, and yeah, just like anybody else. William, how about yourself?
I don't know. Amanda and Olivia pretty much nailed it there. I mean, that's pretty much what I was going to say. Outside of being your own self-advocate, and I'll go ahead and plug my website if folks want to head out there and, pay me to do stuff. That'd be great. I never miss an opportunity to self-promote if I can. And I think folks with autism, we need to self-promote. We need to learn how to, identify our strengths, play to those strengths, and not be afraid to tell people that, hey, we've got some challenges, but we've got some pretty nifty gifts as well. And I think if we can do that, we'll be okay.
Yeah, I absolutely love that. And Will, that's actually a great transition point because now I'm going to share with all of you guys the esteemed panelists' contact information. So I thank all of you greatly for joining us this evening. And now it's all about answering your questions. So thank you all again for joining us, obviously the esteemed panelists. And if you have any questions, feel free to write them in the chat box. I will moderate as we're going along. One housekeeping note, the Atlanta Autism Consortium was nice enough to write in the chat that this is recorded. So you will receive a link to this recording following tonight's presentation, just in case you missed anything, you want to go back and check out a resource potentially. So just so you know about that. So we had a great question come in just to start off this Q&A. This question is about parents. So the question is, what would you have wanted your parents to know about autism when you were growing up? Does anyone want to take that question? Anyone have thoughts? We kind of talked a little bit about the educator and therapist perspective. What is something parents should know about what helped us growing up?
Can I go? I'd like to say.
Absolutely.
So yes, so along, like you mentioned, Kerry, with the educators and the therapists, just having knowledge of what autism is. But what I would say is, you know your child best. You know, a therapist, a doctor, educator, they don't live with your child. You live with your child. You see them, you know, at the bad. Because my mom always likes to say, nobody ever saw your, you know, like bad days or your bad times when I'm having huge meltdowns or whatever it may be. And so that's why it was like super shock to most people who knew me when I got my diagnosis, because I always just appeared to be some, you know, smiley, happy-go-lucky girl, which was my mask a lot of times. So be your kid's, like, you know, biggest advocate, because, you know, I'm sure if my mom went to one of my teachers when I was young or a doctor and said, hey, I think, you know, maybe she's autistic, I'm sure they would have squashed that and shut her down, much like my therapist and many other therapists have done to adults on the spectrum. So don't be afraid to like speak up and say, hey, like, you're not seeing this part of them. You know, they do this, this, and this. So that's what I would say I'd love for parents to know is don't be afraid to speak up. And if you get somebody who says like, no, that's not it, but you really feel strongly about it, go find somebody else.
Wow. Really nicely said. Amanda, William, anything you'd like to add to that question?
Yeah, I definitely always get a second opinion if you're not, well, you don't want to go shopping for a diagnosis, but you also don't want to take necessarily the first opinion you get. If you know in your gut that something's not right, go talk with some other professionals. Also, just remembering that, you know, we do have ideas and we do have thoughts and feelings like anyone else. We don't always know how to express them not correctly, appropriately. So just, you know, helping us to be patient with that and responding with love as best you can. I know we can be frustrating because I live with roommates and they are frustrating, but you know what? So is everybody else. So.
Yeah, absolutely. Amanda, anything you want to add?
Yeah, I guess the only thing to add to that, because everyone else said it so well, is stimming it's okay. It's okay to stim. I know that as you know, I stim when I'm really upset, more so than if for any other reason. But my son stims when he's at school, and everybody's always noted that they're so taken aback at first, in the sense that he's just really just vibing. He's doing, you know, and it doesn't interfere with anything else that he's doing. And he's just so confident. And they're like, wow, how did he get that confidence? So I was like, because we always showed that it's okay. He learned how to, you know, through years of therapy with him and me too, years of therapy, all different types of therapy. We learned how to not look at everything from a deficit. You know, we encourage like certain things that if this helps him regulate, or he's just vibing, again, we love music in our household, it's okay. And it builds up their person's confidence when we're, as parents, not constantly saying, stop that, or if we don't get embarrassed about it, which is hard to do, I must admit. but it is possible and it's okay. Just tell yourself that it's okay.
Yeah, as long as it's not self-injurious, I 100% agree with everything you just had to say, Amanda. Well said. So we have some great questions coming in. Thank you all so much. Feel free to post them in the chat. We'll try to get to as many as we can. Rudy writes, hey, Rudy, Dr. Magro, what can I do to make people aware of my autism? Should I host an autism awareness training? Now, Rudy, this is a really good question. I'll tell you why. Disclosure is a topic that nobody talks about in our schools. I feel like nobody talks about our schools from the schools that I've gone to. We need to do a better job of educating on that whole area. We should be telling our loved ones about their diagnosis at an earlier age. That way they can self-advocate for themselves and learn more about their strengths and weaknesses. For yourself specifically, I mean, one of the things that I started out when I was first told people about having autism for the first time when I was a college freshman was I just started off very slow. I started off by telling some of my close friends a little bit about my autism diagnosis. And you know what? Many of them were very accepting. They kind of were like, oh, Kerry, that's interesting. Can you tell me a little bit more about autism? And that kind of spurred me to disclose it to more and more individuals. I was already disclosing it to my colleges and the places that I was working at, but it was just starting off small, taking those baby steps, just sharing it with a few people and then continuing that conversation. Do you guys have anything on this question about just disclosure and what Rudy can do to make people aware of autism? It's okay if you don't too.
I didn't hear who you said that, who you were asking first.
Oh, no, just open floor, and anybody could take this.
In terms of diagnosis disclosure, I've gone from telling everybody to now I don't talk. I try not to tell everybody as much. I probably still talk about it too much. But yeah, I mean, when you're on the job, it can be good to tell your employer, but according to the American Disabilities Act, you do not have to. There is zero legal obligation to tell your employer that you're autistic, from what I understand. And I may be misremembering, but I think that's the law. So yes. Just know that you're not lying if you don't tell them. You don't have to hide it, but you don't have to feel like you're deceiving. That was how my brain would go. If I wasn't telling someone, it meant that I was lying. It's like, we're very truthful, we're wired that way.
Well said. Amanda, Olivia, any thoughts? You don't have to, obviously. Anything you want to add?
I just feel like I don't have super helpful thoughts because I'm very, very open. Like I overshare like everything. And so when I found out, I was so excited and happy about it because I'd been seeking it for so long. I just like blurted it out to everybody on social media and was really excited about it. So I'm not sure I have super helpful tips because I wasn't embarrassed or ashamed or anything. But the only thing I would say is, don't be embarrassed or ashamed. And if somebody doesn't take it well, then that's on them, not on you.
Yeah, absolutely. Amanda?
Yeah, no, and I had a very different experience than Olivia in that regard. It took me, even with my son being diagnosed, it took me a good solid few years to start disclosing in certain spaces where I felt safe enough to do so. And then it ebbs and flows, just like William said. Sometimes I very much disclose a lot because I'm really like intense at that moment. And then other times I really reflect on why am I disclosing? Now I'm at a space where it's like, oh, what's my purpose for disclosing? If it's in like a professional setting, if it's in a personal setting, etc. Personal settings, most people in my world know. Actually, everybody in my world knows. On the professional settings, I have to be aware. I mean, I'm a brown woman, so sometimes I do get discriminated upon. That's just how it flows. So I have to be aware if it's safety factor, if it's safe enough to disclose. That's unfortunate, but it's a part of my reality. And as much as I love that there are rules that they cannot fire you for a disability, and now in practice, but even in school, in my own academic setting, I just recently got accommodations for the first time because it can be really difficult. So that's sometimes I think on those types of levels, what is my purpose for disclosing? But it can be really helpful. It ebbs and flows. Just be kind to yourself at the end of the day. Okay.
Yes, yes. Shower people with kindness. I love this question from Liliana. Hey, Liliana, thanks for joining us this evening. Just as a housekeeping thing, before we get to Liliana's question, another question just popped up about this QR code in the left-hand corner. Great question. So at the end, I consider testimonials the greatest compliment. So I will share this with the panelists. If you learned something new from today's presentation and you would just like to take 30 seconds and leave a few nice thoughts about what you learned for the panelists, that would be amazing. You could follow the link, which I believe is clickable on your screen, or you could take your phone out, go to the camera app on your phone, take a photo of this screen, and the QR code will literally pop up. There will be a little thing that pops up, and then you'll be able to leave a testimonial for our esteemed panelists. So Liliana writes, and she says, what is one thing you wish you did not have to go through? I'm a parent of a 14-year-old boy, homeschooled and thriving now, academically and musically talented. I wonder if being away from brick and mortar school is the right choice. So Liliana, I'll start with the first part of that question, which I think is really important. Autism at the end of the day is a disability. As much as we might have people who say there's so many abilities in disability, we have to characterize autism as a disorder, a disability. So I think it's really important that we kind of address that. As much as we have some amazing, incredible panelists who are doing some incredible things, we all have challenges, even if we've been able to overcome many of our obstacles, just like anyone else. What are your thoughts, guys? What's one thing you wish you did not have to go through, if there is any?
Oh, bullying. I wish I didn't have to go through that when I was younger. And I wish nobody ever had to go through that or experiencing bullying for their differences.
Yeah, the one thing I wish I didn't have to go through was school. So you homeschooling your child, I think, is amazing because, I would have loved if I had been homeschooled. In high school, I actually, it's a long story, but I nearly like dropped out of high school because I just couldn't take it anymore. And I always said I had like a mental breakdown, but it turns out I was just very severely burned out, unbeknownst to me. But I started doing homeschooling at that time and was able to go at my own pace. I finished a semester early because I just wanted to get the heck out of there. So I think you're making your son miss out on anything. I think what you're doing is amazing, and your son will thank you one day.
William, anything? You don't have to, by the way.
No, I'm always willing to talk. No, I think if I could go back, in time, I would love to have skipped middle school because that was just horrible. Part of it, and I'll say this because here's a caveat. Here's a caveat to that. I would have loved to have skipped middle school or have had someone at that age who could talk to me at my level to train me in some of the social skills. Because I'll be honest, some of my bullying had to do with my perception of what was happening. I couldn't tell the difference between bullying and guys ripping on each other. I just assumed everyone was bullying me. So and there was stuff like that and things that I would try to do to be funny that weren't actually funny. And then it was disastrous things. That's one of the things I tried to help some of my students when I was doing special ed is realizing, okay, you're right. Those kids should not treat you that way. However, you could definitely do 1, 2, 3, and 4 things to reduce some of that, I don't want to ever blame the victim, but also we need to know we need to get our tools together to where we're able to survive the jungle.
Annie writes, hey, Annie. Annie has a great question. Autism is a social and communication disorder, obviously at its core. Annie writes, what helped your speech emerge? Now, this is a great question. I actually don't know if any of you had any specific speech challenges at the beginning of your journey and can tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, I did. Really until I was around 4. And then when I did, it was not a known language. It was some kind of made up language. And I couldn't make any forward sound. So everything like ended in like a guttural sound. And so my mom did send me to speech therapy. And from what she said, I don't really remember too much, but from what she said, my therapist had me speaking almost perfectly, normal in like 2 sessions. So don't be afraid to, send your child to a therapist because, they're there for a reason and they can be very helpful.
Yes. Same, Olivia, same.
Oh, really?
When I was 4, yeah. My mom thought I was deaf.
Oh,
and my dad was like, she's not deaf. And they did one of those like clap things in the back and I would turn, but I just didn't speak. They thought I was an English second language because I come from a Spanish speaking and English speaking household. So school just assumed it was ESL. So they put me in speech therapy. But English was my first language. It just, again, I knew both, but that's why I went to speech therapy. But that really helped me articulate both languages, because there were certain words I just really couldn't say. But yeah, the speech therapy, man, that really helped. That helped my son too. I mean, we went from we have a very high vocabulary. My son, the exact same. He got in really early on speech therapy and boom, his vocabulary just jumped. But it was intense work. At the time, even looking back, it was hard because I had to stay in every recess and, it wasn't the funnest all the time, but yeah, it helped. It just like opened the door and then I just started talking a lot.
Nice. Well, William, are there any final thoughts as we kind of wrap up for this evening on this question about speech?
I never had a delay with speech. I was reading from a very early age. I was trying to tell stories. I wasn't always able to communicate quite well, but I didn't have any issues with talking.
Got it. And yeah, just on my perspective, I was not speaking until I was 2.5, didn't start speaking complete sentences till I was 7. My parents just really nurtured sound. Music was very therapeutic. And even though I had no words, I always had sounds. So nurturing sounds via music. The American Speech Language and Hearing Association has some great resources that I would highly, highly recommend looking up more, especially from the speech therapy end. But I would like to give another round of applause to the incredible esteemed panelists that we had here tonight. Again, these are the ways that you can stay in touch with all of us. If we didn't get to your question, feel free. Shoot us a line, let us know how we can help, because it takes a village at the end of the day. And I also just want to give another special shout out to the Atlanta Autism Consortium for hosting us for tonight's presentation.
Absolutely. And on behalf of the AAC, our volunteers, our staff, and our board members, thank you to our panelists, Kerry, Olivia, Amanda, William. This was a fantastic discussion. Just seeing the questions that are coming through in the chat window, I can already tell that this is a program we should have again. I personally learned a lot from listening to all of your stories and perspectives, and I know that many of our attendees did tonight too. Thank you so much for giving your time to our community. For all of our attendees, just a quick reminder that you will be receiving an email either tonight or tomorrow morning with more information about our panelists and how to reach them, as well as more information about the Atlanta Autism Consortium. We do provide free programs every single month, and we will be having quite a few coming up this year, including a program on autism in girls, one on Social Security disability with eligibility, application, and appeals focused on, a puberty panel, an employment and transition fair, and a really interesting event about emerging research that will be headed up by Marcus Autism Center. We appreciate all of you being here, and we hope that we will see you again at another AAC event this year. Thank you again to all of our attendees also for giving your time tonight to be part of this program. To all of our panelists, any last words you would like to leave our attendees with?
Just thank you so much.
Yeah, no, I just, go ahead, everyone, please go. Yeah, we're all tongue-tied now. We've had
all our autism show that one.
Yeah, my autism has been on all night.
Yeah.
Trying to turn it down. It's not going down.
I sound like a broken record, but I appreciate again the Atlanta Autism Consortium. I would just love, I do have a question for you guys. How can people learn more about the Atlanta Autism Consortium after tonight's panel?
Awesome. Thank you, Kerry. I appreciate that. So in the chat window, I did share links to our social media platforms. We are very active on both Instagram and Facebook, though we do have a LinkedIn if you want to connect there with us as well. Our handle is @ATL Autism. You can also visit our website, which is www.atlautism.org. And in the email, all of you will receive after tonight's program, there will be links to more information about us, as well as more information about our upcoming panels. Thank you for asking that, Kerry. I appreciate it.
Anytime.
All right. Well, then, thank you so much, everyone. We appreciate your time, and we look forward to seeing you again at a future AAC program.
Bye.
Have a nice night, everyone.
Bye.
Good night.